We're in Perek Yud-Chet in Sefer Yeshayahu. Now, Perek Yud-Chet is going to be one of the more poetic prakim that we have encountered. And we've encountered a lot of poetry until now anyways. And what I did for you, and for those who are online, I also did the same. I just printed it out in some boxes. So maybe you'll be able to get a little bit of an overview of the Perek and what's going on. And you can just see what's the step-by-step progression. Basically, within this Perek, and I'm going to be sharing it on my screen right now, within this Perek, what you find are about 5 different pieces, okay? And the 5 different pieces, Elaine is on her way, Barry. She's on her way. Okay, there are 5 different pieces. Because I saw her. Is that one, there's an opening pasuk. That opening pasuk we're going to deal with. We have no definitive clue of, well, we have clues, but we have no definitive answer what it's referring to. Yes, it sounds like it almost. Or according to Rav Schwab, the tzitzi fly, actually. Then we have the second piece, which is the second pasuk, which describes, and we'll get into all the details, which describes sending of messengers, sending of representatives, or as the King James said, sending of ambassadors. Okay, they're going to see us. Okay, and apparently it sounds like they're going to be seeing us in Eretz Yisrael. Pasuk Gimel and Daled. Now, Gimel and Daled shift the focus, and that's the third box on this chart. It's going to shift the focus, and what's going to happen in this focus is it's going to say you really didn't need to send anybody. Then we'll have pasuk Hey and Vav, which says, by the way, all of your plans that have been going on for a long time will be for naught, and you're going to be utterly destroyed. And then what happens is a real interesting thing, and I highlighted it in blue on the 2 source sheets, on the source sheet, because we find almost an exact repetition of the way we opened, with just a couple of minor changes, where we talk about Memushach u'morat u'me'am noram minhu v'hala goy kav kev u'mevusa asher baz'u naharim artzo. So we're really, this is a very brief Perek. It has a few pieces to it, and those pieces we can identify. But what we don't know, and that's where part of the challenge comes in, is we don't know precisely what it's talking about. So on the one hand, and this is where it's important to remember context, on the one hand, we had started the previous Perek talking about the destruction of Damascus. Okay, we talked about the Masa Damasek. Okay, that this is going to be the destruction. This is a very heavy prophecy, a destructive prophecy that's coming against Damascus. And this Perek doesn't open with the same kind of opening. It doesn't open with Masa something else. So many of the Meforshim suggest that this is a continuation. For example, the Radak says this chapter is going to be a continuation that's talking about ultimately there's going to be a salvation for us following the destruction of Damascus. It's like a natural flow. There's their destruction. We're going to see they're going to try to get us, and ultimately we're going to be saved, and it's going to be a happy ending for us. That's the Radak's approach. The Rashi, however, takes a very different approach. Actually, let me go back for a second. The Malbim takes a different approach also. The Malbim takes a third approach. And the Malbim's approach is, this is a historical account. And we need to remember the history. We're in the 8th century BCE. We're in a scenario where Aram, Damascus, and the northern tribes of Israel had created alliances where they were trying to defend themselves against Assyria. They had tried to schlep Malchut Yehuda, the southern kingdom, into that alliance. They had refused. The Sancheiriv is sweeping across, exiling the northern tribes, destroying Aram, entering into Eretz Yisrael also as a major destructive force. And this is describing those events. And we're talking about what's going to happen ultimately to Sancheriv. So we have one approach that says that, this is the Radak. The Radak is saying we're starting out historically and we're going to be moving towards the time of Mashiach. We have the Malbim that is more describing a situation of the historical description. We're talking about the destruction of Sancheriv and his armies, the Malchut of Ashur, of Assyria, and this is what's their outcome going to happen there. And then you have Rashi, and Rashi is actually the majority of opinion within Chazal. Rashi takes this as a continuation or a response to actually the 38th chapter of Yechezkel. In the 38th chapter of Yechezkel, we find a description of the destruction of Gog. Now, Gog and Magog, in English, we refer to them as Armageddon, are some major nations that are going to enter into some massive, cataclysmic, apocalyptic kind of battle. That battle is going to lead to massive destruction, and following that battle will come the salvation of Mashiach. If you remember, we talk about Mashiach coming to Ito Achishena, that there are two different ways Mashiach will arrive. Either we deserve it or we don't deserve it. There aren't too many other options. If we deserve it, it'll come a little peacefully. If we don't deserve it, there will be this apocalyptic event of Armageddon. We don't really know what it means, and it isn't like they show in Hollywood, but it's described in pretty horrific terms. For example, even here, we talk about the loss of life is going to be so massive that the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael are going to try to bury all of the dead, and 7 months, and it still won't be successful, of the enemy who are destroyed. For 7 months, they're going to try, it still won't be successful. That's the level of destruction. Now, with Rashi's approach of talking about Armageddon, Rashi basically takes it out of the historical context. Rashi doesn't say necessarily that this is the continuation of the previous parak. So the advantage, for example, to a Radak approach, to a Malbim approach, is they talk about how it flows from the previous parak, from the Masad Damasek, how it flows from that destruction of Damascus in their empire. According to Rashi, it flows actually from chapter 38 of Sefer Yechezkel. And these are all books that are intermingled, these prophecies, even though they're living at different times, they're intermingled on these prophecies. The real battle here, and this is something we will continue to deal with throughout Yeshayahu and the Nevi'im Achronim always, is remember, we have a principle that in order for a book to have been canonized and become part of the Tanakh, it has to have an eternal message. It can't just be a historical account. Now, there are books that sound like historical accounts. The Nevi'im Rishonim sound a lot like historical accounts. And then you have to find those overarching themes that make it something of significance for us. And in fact, if you think about it for a moment, Rashi actually is bothered by that question right at the beginning of Sefer Breshit. When Rashi opens up Sefer Breshit, and he says, basically, why do we need the story of creation? What difference does it make to us? And he says, because we want to establish who is the power over the entire world, who has the ability to control, who has Eretz Yisrael or not, that when the nations of the world come and say, listimatem, that you're thieves, you robbed the land of Israel from us, we're going to be able to say, God is the one who created the earth, God is the one who gives it, God is the one who takes it, God gave it to us now. Okay, so Rashi also was bothered by why talk about creation, what's the eternal message? And Rashi gave that eternal message. So that question of eternal message is really one that always is bothering. So the Dat Mikra takes a position, and others do it as well. The Dat Mikra does it in one of his essays at the end of this chapter, where he talks about the fact that actually it's a combination of factors. That we need to realize that there is both an element of history and an element of future in all of these stories. And whenever I tell a historical story, there's some other side to it, that you're right, I can put this in context of what was going on in the time of Assyria and the time of the Arameans and the northern tribes and Chizkiyahu Melech in the south ultimately. I can put pieces of this in the context. But the ultimate salvation we never did see. So there's this mixture of both history and eternity within these chapters. So I can try to attach it to something, and I can say, hey, this sounds like this, but there will be pieces that are going to defy that ability to attach to pure historical accounts. Now, what makes this parak even more complicated is this parak has a lot of poetry and very little direct description of places, people, nations, and times. And so I can take these words and attach it to all different kinds of events and all different possibilities. And that's why this parak, I started when we first were ready to start saying, I really don't understand it. Well, I don't feel bad, because when you start looking through the Meforshim, you have so many different pathways to go through. I can take what I understand and pieces that speak to me, and that's perhaps one of the beauties of it as well, because you can look at this on all different levels. That's a lot of introduction for a very brief parak. So, yeah, there was a question? Yeah. Oh, just out there. Okay. So the very brief parak just starts out with this opening word. And again, I refer you back to this sheet, which is just, there's nothing new on this sheet. I just broke it up a little bit because I get the feeling sometimes when you see that entire parak, it's easier to understand. The Chaim has an article on this there was a series of books put out called Mayanot. And years and years ago in the 50s or 60s, they came out, and she wrote an article which talked about how sometimes when we study individual psukim, we literally lose the forest for the trees. And so one of the first things you might want to do is take the overview and to see what's going on. And then if you want to delve in and you want to start looking in. So this is one of those prakim where there's no chance that I could understand it without looking at the overview, and I want it in one place. And that's where we have it. The very first pasuk is an interesting pasuk, and it is calling us to a time and a place, but it's using language which we don't fully understand. And it starts out, Hoy Eretz Tziltzal Kanafayim. So it starts out, Hoy, to the land of Kanafayim, we know are wings. But Tziltzal could be a number of different possibilities. On the one hand, Targum Yonatan says that this comes from the word tzel, which means shaded. Shade, like to sit in the shade under the tree. And in fact, what he talks about is the Knafayim, according to Targum Yonatan, that this is the land which sends off boats. And what are the Knafayim? The sails of like the sails that make the noise when they go back and forth, and I'm sure there's a good English word for it, but when the sails are being filled and they're whipping back and forth, the canvas, that, he says, is what's talking about. He's saying this is the land from which the boats, the ships, are sent off on their journeys. It's from Tzel. The Abarbanel says, in fact, it is from Tzel as well, but he says it's a place of mountains where people would live in the shade and the safety of mountains. However, according to Rashi, Rashi says Tziltzal is from like the ringing of a bell, that there's a ringing sound. Okay, Litzaltzel pamon, right? The pamon is mitzaltzel. Okay, and that is, so in that case, that is in Manapia, what is it called? Where the sound sounds like what really is. Okay, tziltzel. It sounds like the ringing of a bell in some way. And he says it's the land of the buzzing or the ringing wings. Ultimately, he says this is a place where there are a lot of birds because they come together because of the heat. And when you have the birds fluttering all together, you hear this noise. It's the land, that land. Now, Rav Schwab says, because we have coming up where it says, Asher me'ever lenaharei Kush, that on the other side of the rivers of Kush, he suggests that this may be the tzitzi fly, because Kush typically is interpreted as Ethiopia. So maybe within Africa, the land of this noise, the land of the shade. And again, we're not really sure what it is, but what's really interesting is Sher Me'ever Eretz Kush, which is on the other side of Kush. Now, if you remember in the introduction, I was saying that historically, if you take the historical approach to this, we're talking about Assyria. Where were the Assyrians located? The Assyrians were located, if you think, past Damascus, right? Northeast of Eretz Yisrael. Where is Ethiopia? Southwest of Eretz Yisrael. So, interestingly, if I'm talking about Ashur, what does Ethiopia have to do with anything? So the Ibn Ezra says that this is talking about Ashur. Cush is talking about Ashur. But how can Cush be talking about Assyria? That Cush would be referring to Assyria.
Oh,
the name Cush, the land, how could that be? Because that's Ethiopia, isn't it? So, interestingly, there is, Rav Schwab notes that there is a place in Afghanistan that's called Cush. Now, Afghanistan, if I'm looking at my locations, I'm north, I'm getting closer. I'm not down in Africa. And I could be within an Assyrian empire. And in fact, I gave you a map. And on the map, if you look in the circle, it's a little hard to see, you see, and it's going on a diagonal this way, there is a mountain plain that is known as the Hindu Kush mountain plain. Now, the fascinating thing about the Hindu Kush mountain plain, that if that is Kush, that's the land called Kush. So first of all, I have the possibility of how Kush is not Ethiopia. That's one. Number two, it also explains another Gemara. There's a Gemara Megillah and Daf Yud Aleph and Amud Aleph. And it says that Achashverosh hamolech mehodu v'ad Kush. And there is a disagreement there. Are Hodu v'ad Kush opposite ends of the world, which we've talked about before, because in the ancient world, India to Ethiopia represented the entire area of a population. The civilized world were from India, Hodu, v'ad Kush. And so he was, what we're saying is that he was, as we also talk about, that Achashverosh was a monarch over the entire world, ala kippah. He had an umbrella over the whole world. He controlled the whole world. Hodu v'ad Kush. And that's the way we normally interpret it. That's the pshat. However, there is another position that says, Hodu v'Kush gabe hadade havukame. Hodu and Kush were right next to each other, and that the definition of Achashverosh hamolech v'Hodu v'ad Kush is that just like a monarch can control in a small enclosed area, okay, a defined area, Achashverosh had the control over the entire world, like he would have control over Hodu and Kush. But the problem is, how do you ever find Hodu and Kush being right next to each other? So if you take this, if you look at the Hindu Kush mountain plain, and you look at the bottom right corner, in other words, you'll see right there, that's where India is. So it could be that this is what they were talking about of Hodu and Kush being right next to each other, because they are. Geographically, you have the Hindu Kush mountain range right near India. So maybe that's what the Gemara is talking about there. It's an interesting side note. It has nothing to do with the Pshat. Huh? 4,500. Yeah, but if I talk about empires, okay, this and India wasn't defined by the boundaries of today. Okay, if I look at Hodu and Kush, they're next to each other. They're countries that are next to each other. Okay, and in essence, by the way, it's not, depending on where I hit from, by the way, it's even a little closer if I go further north in India. It's an interesting possibility, and it's just fascinating in and of itself. But where we got to in the first pasuk is just very saying that you land, we're the land of the fluttering wings, or the land of the, or the land of the shade, whatever that land is. You listen to this. Hasholeach bayam sirim. Rashi explains that what is happening here, we're going to take mostly Rashi's approach. Rashi says, since this is talking about the future time, that Gog is going to send messengers to see if it's true that the Jews have returned to the land of Israel. Are the Jews really there? According to others, this could be that messengers are being sent to check, for example, if it's true what happened to Sancheiriv in Yerushalayim, where his army just disappeared. They're sending people, and they're sending these people over to see what's happening. Now, what happens? Uvechle goma al pnei mayim. Okay, and they're traveling in these light boats on the face of the sea. Now, yeah.
There's no sea.
Oh, but if you remember, Targum Yonatan says, if I'm not going from that, if I'm going from, as Rashi says, that Rashi, we're really talking about Ethiopia, that we're traveling across Africa, across the Mediterranean, okay? And it can be, by the way, if I'm saying it's Assyria, they could be traveling down the coast south as well. Okay, so they could be coming from a number of different locations. They could be coming up also from the Gulf of Aqaba. They could come up from all different ways because the Assyrian Empire was not just limited. Okay, we're defining the Assyrian Empire according to those approaches as the place which is the place of the fluttering wings. But the Assyrian Empire was not just limited to a small area of space. It had conquered massive portions of the land. They're sending people on boats, and they're sending people on boats. Now, the boats, if you notice, are, in this case, clay goma. Well, clay goma sounds really weird, because on the one hand, as the Radak points out, these are boats made from papyrus. The Aruch, which is the classic Talmudic dictionary, says this is actually cork. It's a light material. It floats very high up, and you may think it's a little kind of weird, but if you think back to Sefer Shemot, where we put Moshe, we put him in a basket of reeds of Gomer. We use the same terminology, that was the way they put him. So it's something that people would use to have a light boat. It can go on quickly on the top of the water. It doesn't go low. L'chu malachim kalim, go you quick. Messengers, okay? See if it's true that the Jews, Rashi says, see if it's true if the Jews have returned to their land. Now, according to Hirsch, this is all the Navi is basically talking to these other nations, in this case Gog, he's talking to, and he's being sarcastic. This is sarcastic in his comments. Oh, you heard? Yeah, why don't you go check it out? Why don't you go there and check it out? Okay, and who are you going to check out? El Goy Mimushach o Morat, to the people who have been dragged and plucked. Mimushach o Morat, Rashi's, Shimon Schwab says very simply, this is go to the place where the people have been exiled from country to country. They've been moved from place to place, to that nation. El Am Nora Minhu Vahala, to the nation that is fearsome. Nora is awe-inspiring from the beginning. Minhu, from that day, according to Rashi, that they were chosen. This is a nation, the Jewish people, from the moment we received the Torah on Har Sinai, we have been a people that others look at us, say the Radak, and he says, Ro'im bahem niflaot. We are awe-inspiring. I want you to go, yeah, go. You heard the Jews are going back? Yeah, send your fastest ship, your fastest messengers. Go check out this people that's been exiled from place to place. The people that have always caused others, a sense of awe. If you remember Toynbee, Arnold Toynbee was the great British historian who was infuriated by the Jews. There was a famous debate he had with Ambassador Chaim Herzog. The brother, not Chaim, his brother, Yaakov Herzog, thank you, with Ambassador Yaakov Herzog. Toynbee was infuriated by the Jews because the Jews did not follow his theory of nations. We should have disappeared. And he was a tremendous anti-Semite. Yaakov, there was on BBC Radio, Yaakov Herzog took him down. Really great. Yaakov Herzog was a tremendous Talmud Chacham. He was chief of staff to Moshe Dayan. He was the ambassador. He did amazing. Unfortunately, he passed away very young. He wrote a commentary on Mishnayot, which he didn't finish in English. A tremendous scholar, diplomat, and everything else along the way. I have somewhere on a CD the recording. You can get the recording of that BBC debate between Toynbee and Herzog. Huh? Yeah. I assume by now it's on YouTube. It's worthwhile listening to the two of them debate it. But the reality is, we are this people. We are this people who have been exiled all over the place, and yet we cause others to just be in awe of us because we shouldn't be here. From the beginning, this happened. Goy kav umivusam, a nation that kav Kav, we'll get to that in a moment, has been trampled. Now, what is Kav? Kav. According to Rashi, Kav should be measured, that God has punished us a little bit at a time. We've been punished for what has happened. We've been trampled over. Rashi offers another possibility of the word kav, because that should be kuf bet. Okay, kav, according to Rashi, also may come from the word vomit, who has been vomited about. Yeah, who's been vomited upon, was Rashi's other possibility. Radak says kav means a little by little. And he explains kav as the line, as the plumb line, or the bricklayer's line. When they're laying brick, if they're doing a good job, they're measured to make sure that all the bricks are the same height. It's actually an amazing art. I don't know if anyone's ever seen a bricklayer or ever tried it yourself. I remember many years ago at Mosheva, they were making a brick barbecue. Okay, and so they gave it to the kids. How hard can it be, right? You take a brick, you put a little cement on top, you take another brick, and it was just a little thing like this. And I don't know how many weeks the kids worked to get about yay high, a couple feet off the ground, and it would look like a mess. Okay. And then the guy who knew how to do what he was doing came in and knocked it off in one day. And you can see it, it's not there anymore. Unfortunately, I think they got rid of it. But you could see at that point, the lower things were messy, and also on the top, it looked so pretty. Okay. Because you do it, if you know how to do it, it's perfectly measured out where every line is. And so according to the Radak, the kav means that what has happened to the Jews is just like you lay one layer of brick at a time. It's a little bit at a time, okay, until you finish the thing and everything's measured. That's what we're talking about, the kav, that it's a little bit at a time. What has happened to the Jews has been a little bit at a time. It has been measured in a sense, and we have been trampled upon. This is the nation. You want to go look at this nation that's been exiled, that you can't figure out, you're in awe of it, that have been punished a little bit of time, have been trampled upon, asher bazu naharim artso, which have been despoiled by naharim. Naharim is a possibility. It's a mashal to those who are monarchs. Okay, the Targum Yonatan says Naharim is another way of saying Amamaya peoples. They have trampled us, they have exiled us, they've moved us from one place to the next, they have taken all of our property. Yeah, go check them out. You want to check them out? Go check them out. And then Kol Yoshvei Tevel, okay, B'shochne Aretz, all of the people of the world, all of the people who reside on the earth, Kinaso Nes Harim Tiru, you will see when the banner is raised. Ukitkoa shofar tishmau, and when the shofar is blown. Now, this pasuk is actually going to be in Rosh Hashanah davening. This is one of the psukim in shofar that we use. Remember, we have the 10 psukim in each of the 3 sections, and this is one of the 10 psukim that have been pulled out to be in shofar. Now, what does it mean? What are they going to be seeing? What's this talking about? Well, Rashi and the Radak both say, what are you bothering sending messengers for? Everyone's going to know when the Jews come back. You're going to be able to see the banners are high. You're going to be able to hear the shofar. This is not something you really have to check out. It's going to be obvious to everyone. According to the Ibn Ezra, well, the Ibn Ezra, if you remember, is going back to this whole thing talking about Ashur. What he's saying is that all the nations of the world are coming to find out what happened to the Assyrians, to Sanherib, and his downfall in Yerushalayim. So the Ibn Ezra says, no, when you're gonna be looking, is you're gonna be sending people. Well, everybody's gonna know about what happened to Sanherib. That's going to be a very public event. His failure to conquer Yerushalayim and his disappearance, and the way his entire army collapsed. So this is not something that you need to send your swift messengers. Or to go back to that overview, we started out telling, hey, you nations out there, which nations are? It may not be Ashur, it may be other nations of the world who are going to be sending their people there. It may be Gog, who is coming at a later point in time. We really don't know, who wants to see if the Jews have returned. It may be the nations coming, not to support Gog, but to see what happened actually to Sanherib, that we're really just talking about Sanherib, for example. That's part of the Malbim. The Ibn Ezra take this approach. Don't bother. You don't even need to. It's going to be something really, really big. Everyone's going to know about it. Now, while this is going on, at the very same time, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to Kicho Amar Hashem Elai. The Navi says, by the way, how do I know all this? God said this to me. And he says, Eshkata va'abita b'mechonim. While they're trying to do what they're doing, while they're sending and they're thinking of destroying all the rest of the stuff, I'm going to be at ease. I'm going to be shaket. I'm going to be my lazy boy. Okay. Va'abita b'mechoni, and all I'm going to be looking at is my machon, my Beit HaMikdash. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, you guys are going to be all tzehitz. You're going to be running all over the place, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to see the bigger message and things. God says, have a nice time. I'm sitting back. I'm just going to be concerned about what's going to be happening in my machon. Okay. Instead of God, Rashi says, instead of God thinking about punishments, he's saying he's going to be looking at what's good for the Jewish people. Kechom tzach ale or. This is like like clear heat on sunlight. Okay. You know how people say, oh, it's really not that bad. It's just dry heat. Okay. Ke'av tal b'chom katsir, like the harvest heat on a cloud of dew. Now, what does this talk about? Okay, all of these things, when these two things happen, when there's a lot of sunlight, but it's that clear heat, or when the cloud of dew are there and the harvest and the cloud of dew, those are things that are good for the fields. So God is saying, while you're doing all these things and you're running around and you're trying to find out what's going on, or you're planning to destroy the Jewish people, I'm sitting back. I'm looking at the positive. I'm trying to be productive in all of these things. I'm not worried about what's happening there because I know what's going to happen there. Ki liftnei katsir ketam perach. And then God goes ahead in this next piece, which is Hey and Vav. God says, listen, you're plotting, and I'm going to take Rashi's approach for a moment. The plots of Gog to destroy the Jewish people, all of those different plots, now I can apply this just as well to the historical Sancheriv, right? I can say the plot, what Sancheriv had planned to do. All of them began, Kilifnei Katsir Ketam Perach, when the bud of the fruit was just blossoming. In other words, these have been plans that have been in place from the beginning for a very long time. They've been going on into this place. So they've been growing, and they've been your plots against the Jews have been growing more and more. Uvoser gomel yenitzam, and the unripened fruits will ripen. In other words, your whole idea, we're taking terminology from both agriculture, and gomel is also to stop nursing a child when a child's weaned. All of those kinds of things. We're taking these pieces. You have been plotting for so long, and it's been growing and growing and growing, and then you're ready to attack. V'charat, and when you're ready to attack, yenitza, it will be a approaching ripeness. In other words, everything is ready to go. You're going to be ready. Okay, as Rashi says, to battle Yerushalayim, you're going to be ready to destroy us, whether this is Sancheriv or this is Gog. V'charat hazalzalim b'mazmerot. Step number one, God is going to cut down the small branches, the zalzalim, with mazmerot, with pruning hooks. What does this mean? God is going to destroy the enemy. The zalzalim, these are the small vines. Interesting, Rav Schwab says it's zalzalim. The reason why it's called, it's coming from the word zol, which means cheap or small. Okay, that's the why zalzalim is this word. The etanetishot, and those branches, the bigger branches that have spread out, Hesir Hates, are going to be removed and cut. Now, Rav Hirsch says that originally, what we need to understand here is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to allow the enemy to mass, to grow in power, and then at the moment when it's necessary, he's promising that he's going to save us. Ye'azvu yachdav le'et harim, and all will be left. In other words, you're going to be, the last thing, Hesir Hates, God is going to cut them down. Well, this is talking about people. God is going to kill them. All of these corpses are going to be left. Le'et harim, na'et harim, and that's that's a mountain eagle is one translation, vultures are another translation. The Jews, according to the Gemara, and this is based on the psukim in Yechezkel Lametet, are going to do their best to bury as many of these casualties. They're going to work at it for 7 months, doing it according to Yechezkel, and they're going to be unsuccessful in finishing the task. And the rest of the worlds are going to look on us, and they're going to be v'haya lahem l'shem. It's actually the way we're going to treat the casualties of our enemies is going to be a kiddush Hashem, is what Yechezkel tells us. Here it's going to be, at some point, though, we're not going to be able to get it. The vultures are going to descend, ulevehemat haaretz, and animals of the field are going to be consuming the casualties. Vikatz alav ha'ait, in the summer. Okay, in this case, katz is like kayitz. The ait, that vulture, is going to come down on them in the summer. V'chol be'mat haaretz alav techaraf, and all of the animals of the field will come in the winter. So this destruction is going to be massive, what is going to be happening here. And again, I'm going to jump back and forth between the different ways of looking at it. On the one hand, we could be talking just a historical account, just Sancheriv. Sancheriv did all of the bad things. He plotted, he planned, he created an empire, and his destruction is going to be absolute. I could be talking about a future period of Gog and Magog, of Armageddon, what's going to happen to the enemies. Their destruction is going to be massive and absolute. And I could be talking about both. And that's really what we're probably talking about here, because Yeshayahu is couching a future prophecy within a prophecy of the present. He's talking about what's going to happen, but it's also going to apply further than that. Ba'et hahi, at that time, and this is the last piece, this is the last pasuk, and it's a fascinating pasuk. At that moment, when our enemies will be cut down, Yuval Shai LaHashem Tzvakot, gifts will be brought to Hashem. What are the gifts? Now, the Jewish people could be the gifts. In other words, this could be the final kibbutz galiot. Rav Schwab lays it out very clearly in this, that this is Rashi, it's based on a Mitzudat David, Yuva Mincha V'Daronet Am Yisrael. They're going to be bringing gifts to Hashem. What is the gifts? The Jewish people will be brought back into Tzion. That's what's going to happen at this moment. And who's going to be brought back? Now we have this same, we've had this word already. Am Mimushach Umarat, the nation that was Mimushach Umarat, that was schlepped from place to place. Umayam Noramin Huvahala, and the people who were awe-inspiring from the beginning of their creation. Goy Kav Umevusa, the nation that a little bit at a time in a measured fashion had been trampled upon. Asher Bazu Naharim Artso, which the nations, the kings of nations, had despoiled their land. El Makom Shem Hashem Tzvakot Har Tzion, to the place of God, the God of hosts, to Har Tzion, back to Yerushalayim. Now, it is interesting, though. If you look, first of all, there's a symmetry from the beginning of the parak to the end of the parak, which is a beautiful poetic tool being used, that symmetry. But I don't know if it's chiastic. I was trying to see if anyone suggests the chiastic structure is an X, where you have, let's say, if I would have, basically, when you do poetry, it's A, B, C, C, B, or B, C, A. It's chiastic structure. But the reality here is you do have this piece, but there's a couple of differences. Number one is, if you look at the main thing, and I highlighted it on the sheet, the first time it says El Goy Mimushach Umorat, versus the second time when it says Am Mimushach Umorat. Yeah. Okay. Now, this is Rav Hirsch points this out, that there's a difference between describing the Jews as an Am versus describing them as a Goy. A Goy is a nation. A nation. They're an independent nation as a Goy. Okay. We, by the way, Goy Echad Ba'aretz, right? We're a unique people. To refer to non-Jews as Goyim is a later use of Hebrew. It's not biblical Hebrew. A Goy is a nation. Okay. Often describing Jews. Am is not a nation. Am is more, and I'm not perfect on it. I will describe it and you'll tell me if this works. An Am is a people. An Am comes the word in, where there is collective identity. Okay, it comes from something that we share. According to Rav Hirsch, Am comes from the fact that we are a people of Torah, that the Torah is what binds us together. It's not that we're a nation, we're an Am. And so, according to Hirsch, the way to look at this chapter is that initially, when we were attacked, when we were exiled, when we were oppressed, we had started as a goy. We were taken from our land, and all of these terrible things happened to us. We were the goy who were exiled, trampled, abused. Everything had happened to us. Now, when we're coming back, the only thing that brings us back is we still have a shared identity of Torah. And that shared identity of Torah allows us to be identified as Jews. And therefore, we are Jews who can come back and reestablish being Goyim, being that nation. We weren't that nation in exile. We were the Am in exile. We were the people who were together. And now we still have this piece. And if you look, even within the terminology, Am memushachu moratu me Am nora minhu v'hala goy kav kavu mevusav. He still has that term goy in there. You were a nation that was cut down, that was, that had all of these punishments against you. El makom shem Hashem. Now, if I take Hirsch's approach and I say, okay, what Hirsch is saying is the thing that brings us back is the identity of Torah, then it also makes sense that the place we go back is El Makom Shem Hashem Tzvakot Har Tzion, to the place of the Beit HaMikdash. Our joining point is not, you'll excuse me, Tel Aviv. Our joining point is the place where the Beit HaMikdash is going to be. This is a messianic prophecy that we're going to have this identity. And this ending piece really describes something unique that didn't happen in the time of Sancheriv and didn't happen in the time of Chizkiyahu. The fact that that Sancheriv was destroyed, the fact that the entire Assyrian Empire was destroyed, the fact that there were massive casualties, the fact that they had built up and tried to fight us for all the years, all of those things happened. But that last piece of having all of the Jewish people reunited around Har Tzion did not happen. Could it have happened? Remember, Chazal were looking at Chizkiyahu HaMelech, the one who was placed under siege by Sancheriv. They looked at him as having the potential to be the Mashiach and failing in that possibility. Could this have been a prophecy talking about Chizkiyahu HaMelech and the dream that if Chizkiyahu HaMelech fulfilled his potential, everyone would have come back. The 10 tribes would be reunited. Everyone would have come back and they would have all focused around Yerushalayim. Yeah, it could be. And I could be talking in that sense that he's addressing a historical reality and talking about the near term. But if Chizkiyahu HaMelech would have been Mashiach, that near term would have continued well beyond. Or I could be saying, no, this is describing Mashiach. If Chizkiyahu is going to be Mashiach, great. And if someone else will be Mashiach, great. Okay, it would be nicer to have it earlier. But if it doesn't happen earlier, at some point, there will be a Mashiach who will get these people who maintain, and I'm going to use the broadest of definition, their Jewish identity, and be able to gather them together again. The idea of the Jewish people, and this, by the way, may be why we would use these terminologies. I believe Am might be better defined as a people versus a nation. Okay, the people of Israel have maintained their uniqueness and therefore they're able to be redeemed. The nation of Israel had fallen for a period of time, but the people never lost their identity, and that's what brings them back. And that's that one word that Rav Hirsch points out and notices. And that's this parak, because in the next parak, we once again start out with another people, and then we hit the Masa Mitzrayim, where we're going to start talking about Mitzrayim and what's going to happen to Mitzrayim, to the nation of Egypt. We'll stop right here. Next week, we'll pick up with the next parak. For those online, for joining. and have a wonderful day. Yeah.